All right, Katherine, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Katherine Woodward Thomas. Katherine, welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you.
Appreciate that. So Katherine is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After, which was nominated for a Books for a Better Life Award and the national bestseller, Calling in the 7 weeks to attract the love of your life. She's also a licensed marriage and family therapist and teacher to thousands from all corners of the world in her virtual and in-person learning communities. Katherine is the originator of the conscious uncoupling process made famous by Gwyneth. I'm just going to say Gwyneth.
Gwyneth, we don't even need a last name on that one. Exactly. Thank
by
you.
Gwyneth and Chris Martin, as well as creator of the Calling in the 49 Days to Love online course. Katherine, great to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor.
So before we get going, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I am a Long Island girl, and I spent my 20s living in Greenwich Village and singing in nightclubs.
Wow. How cool is that?
I was a cabaret singer.
Wow. Very cool. So, okay, we're going to get to Gwyneth, but how did
this all happen?
How did this start for you? This interest in getting together and coupling and uncoupling. How did this begin for you?
Well, don't we all learn more about love from the absence of it? Anything, really? Didn't it all start with the traumas we experienced when we were young? You know, my particular version of that is I had a mother who was just barely squeaking out of her teenage years. She was 18 and she fell for the captain of the swim team, and they got pregnant, and then they got married because it was the 50s. And of course, it was a horrible marriage, and they ended up getting divorced, and it was a horrible divorce. It was, nasty and ugly, and it just split everybody in two. So a lot of relational trauma, a lot of, my mother feeling quite overwhelmed with the responsibility and feeling I think trapped in her life. And of course, all those things then imprint as an I am not wanted, I am a burden, all of those things that we all know so well. So of course, those patterns then showed up in my adult relationships. And I had a particular kind of attraction to narcissistic people and people who were really unavailable and incapable of loving me in the way that I, was so hungry to be loved because I had the deficit from childhood, obviously. So I had this feeling, Guy, from a young age, I think, that I was meant to be speaking to people, that one day I might be a teacher, that I felt called to write a book for many years before I did. I think the last thing I ever thought I would write a book about was love, because it was the real disastrous area. I mean, there were difficult areas pretty much all around, but love was just, a lost cause for me. So what happened was, and of course, you have so many trauma-informed followers who are really hip to how our past impacts our present and limits the future that we're living into, and probably creates kind of an imprinting of a negative possible future that we're terrified of and trying to avoid. So that's the consciousness that we're in. And I spent many years in psychotherapy, and I did all sorts of personal development stuff, and all of it was good, and all of it was insanely helpful. And it helped me to overcome an eating disorder that I had, which was quite severe, but it didn't really have the kind of impact that I had wanted in my love life, because those patterns were still showing up. And so when I turned 40, I was pretty distraught about it. And I think when I was 41, I was pretty much steeped in resignation. But here's the thing, I was doing transformational technologies, and I was a student of metaphysics. And in a metaphysical realm and in a transformational workshop, these weekend workshops that kind of pop you into a whole new possibility. They're all about the future that you're standing for. And so I was with a group of people, and we were all just kind of organically supporting each other to manifest kind of outrageous, unreasonable futures. And I had the courage to call a friend from the group, and I said, I'm going to set an intention to be engaged by my 42nd birthday. And that was like 8 months out, no prospects. But she said something. I know, it's very juicy, right? So she said something that changed everything for me. She said, Katherine, I'm going to hold that intention with you and for you if you give me permission to hold you accountable for being who you would need to be in order for that to happen. Very different framework. Very different framework, because suddenly I'm now completely fascinated by, well, who would I need to be and how might I need to grow? And what is the missing development from my childhood? And how would I be showing up differently if I was actually going to be chosen by an amazing man to be his partner? And I just went 100% into that. Now, you can't make true love happen, but you can become a match for it. And so it wasn't so much about running out and trying to find somebody as was. It really became becoming the version of myself that I felt I would need to be in order for love to find me. And in fact, I did end up manifesting this beautiful man.
Shut up.
My life and completely changed the pattern. And we were engaged 2 months ahead of my birthday, and married the following year, gave birth to my daughter when I was 43, just, the good old fashioned way of sleeping with your husband. And I went on to write Calling in the One. And that's what really began that teaching. And I wrote it as a 49-day course, because when I really look, like when I manifest that, which felt like to me, like I pulled a rabbit out of a hat, like manifest this miracle of this, beautiful man who loved me and chose me, whom I respected and admired, like all of it, it just felt so crazy. I thought to myself, this cannot be a personal miracle. Maybe this is the book I was supposed to write. So I just started writing it. And a lot of magic just happened. And, an agent came to me, and then I had no following, and I got a book deal with Random House and, with no platform. And then the book became a national bestseller. So it's almost like the book itself is that kind of attraction element. It just brings the abundance in. So I hear a lot of stories about it where it begins to loosen up things for people. And it's really written for people who were stuck, like I was, who felt like they were kind of, had tried everything and had a lot of deficits in their childhood that set them up to not have healthy relationships and to have a lot of avoidant detachment, which is, I was to the hilt, and to really just create life outside of that. Now,
let me just jump in here. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story and being vulnerable in the way you were. What you said about what your friend said about, in order to hold you accountable, who would you need to be, how would you need to act, that whole paradigm shift. Talk more about that. Why is that so different from a lot of the way we operate?
Oh, it's completely different, Guy. And I'm actually, I train coaches, and I have a lot of therapists who come in and do the work with me. And we meet and we talk about this, and we bring these into our, I don't see, actually, I'm not doing psychotherapy any longer, even though I'm still licensed, but we talk about the difference in the interventions, really, with the future focused approach that I am starting with, that I'm really exploring. And there are several really key things to this approach that I think is radically different than the way that we're normally having conversations. So, and by the way, it's not an either or world. There is a time for all of it. And truthfully, if I try and do this work with people who are still, not, still needing at the beginning of their healing journey, and they have to do that healing work. So it's sacred work, the healing work. But healing and transformation are two different domains. You can be in psychotherapy for a long time and really know your issues backwards, forwards, inside out, and understand completely why you are the way you are without changing a whole heck of a lot.
Right.
Okay. So we know that by now. So the future focused work is really based on, when I started to do research on it, it's based on the work of two wonderful academics who were both psychologists, Pollinarius and Hazel Marcus. And back in the 80s, in 86, came out with an academic article that's based on possible selves. And they talked about the possible selves of the future, both in positive and negative terms. And they distinguished that the future that you're identifying with is actually what's giving you your present. Now, psychotherapy, we're looking so much at the past and how that's giving us our present.
Mm-hmm.
But if you begin, and the way that we all understand this is, if you say, I'm going to be an athlete, like you've been a couch potato all your life, I'm going to be an athlete, I'm going to lose 30 pounds and run the 26-mile marathon next year. That gives you who you are in the present. Like, you get up off that couch, you put those sneakers on, you start to run, you start speaking to yourself, as though you start visioning yourself thinner, leaner, stronger. And that future begins to inform how you need to grow and develop. Most of us, I don't think that understanding can graduate us from the old patterns, because there's actually missing development. And I think we're also in danger of spending too much time looking backwards, because every time you look backwards to who did what, when did they do it, where was I when it happened, how did I feel about that, how do I feel about that, what we're doing inadvertently is also solidifying the self we formed in response to trauma. Okay, so we have to be careful. And I like to start even with people who are in a highly traumatized, which in conscious uncoupling, very often they are, even though they've just lost a future that they had been hoping for and counting on, and, they're devastated. Studies also show, and this was also Hazel Marcus, who's now at Stanford, who did this study, that people who are in the midst of a traumatic breakup, and Judith Herman called a breakup one of the worst traumas we're ever going to go through, because it's a rupture of attachment, was her term.
I just got divorced, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
So this is really kind of weird.
Really relevant. Okay. All right. So Judith called it a rupture of attachment. And you don't really have any sense of a future, and you don't want a new future. But still, then I'll look in conscious uncoupling, the first step is to hold and contain the big emotions. And whatever you're feeling is to sponsor the healthy impulse underneath it. So, for example, if you're feeling rage, what is the healthy impulse underneath rage? Well, it's the reclamation of your right to be treated a certain way. And that can become a positive future. What's your intention? From this moment forward, I will have relationships where I am treated with respect and honor, where I treat others with respect and honor. So you're harnessing the negative energy and you're pointing it in the direction of a positive possible future. So I always start with the future, wherever I am, because that future will begin to inform the ways that I now need to work with the trauma. I mean, you talk about post-traumatic growth a lot, and that begins to inform the growth that's needed. And so I look at identity as a place that we're generating our lives from a lot. In conscious uncoupling, we look at identity as really, if you drop down into what I call your source fracture story, the original wound in your heart, really, I'm alone here, I'll never be loved by anyone. For me, it was I'm not wanted, was a big one for me. You look at that, and very often a breakup will validate that perspective. And that's what I think the core of prolonged grief is that we're lodged in false meaning. It has now become, definitive proof of that old story. So when I'm working with trauma, I'm not as I'm not as seasoned as some of the therapists, I think, who are probably here with us right now and or are highly trained in trauma. I mean, I did a lot of, my own healing work on my own traumas, so I understand it from the inside out. But when I'm working with people, I'm not ever allowing people to kind of collapse into the somatic experience of the old trauma when they're telling me their story.
Mm-hmm.
I try and wake them up to the present, even if I say, what's the best thing about being your current age as opposed to being yourself back then, just to bring them back
Mm-hmm.
in present time. But I am looking for the meaning, the story that's being held in the body, because that's the story that people are generating their lives from. So, for example, when I was doing calling in the one, I know I have so much to say, right? I'm not even
Well,
getting
as you're just as,
it at
excuse me,
once.
as you're talking, I'm thinking you're articulating so many elements that I think for so many of us are unconscious.
Yeah.
We just move through these processes, and yet you are picking them out and shining a light on them, and it's really intense.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
by the way, I don't think that the unconscious is so mysterious. I think it's right there in our bodies. And if you give, if
Mm.
you give your little belly a megaphone, what's the I am that's sitting in your body? I'm alone. Everybody always leaves me. I can never get what I need. How old are you? I'm 4. And how do I show up when I'm in that center and I'm sourcing who I'm being from there? Well, I'm self-sufficient to the extreme. I'm not vulnerable. I avoid conflict like the plague because I'm sure it's the beginning of the end. And I want to do everything to try and keep that person. I'm probably staying in relationships that are not healthy too long because I think that's my only chance at being with somebody. In the meantime, I'm
Mhm.
self-abandoning constantly because I don't want any disagreement at all, because even a leaving is even somebody disagreeing with me or being unhappy with me.
Oh.
It's the core of codependence.
Mm.
And it's right in your belly. It's right in your solar plexus. So to me, it's like I've been really unpacking what I call the 21 core beliefs that we have about love that are relational. I call them your source fracture story, and how we show up from that center in a way that generates evidence, because beliefs are relational, and
Beliefs are
they,
relation.
they started in relationship, and they can only transform in relationship.
Oh,
Whew.
yeah. Hold on, pause. Well, that's a big one. So many big ones. Oh my God, Catherine, incredible. Um, let's kind of take a step back here, a side step here. Why did you write Conscious Uncoupling? I mean, you talked about your I mean, the way you described it, you said everything was kind of awful, but tragic was your relationships. What and why did you write a book about unconscious uncoupling?
Well, because, okay, this is funny because how this started, because 10 years into the marriage, Mark and I divorced. Okay. So, I mean, I joke now, I say, oh, so I had a little PR problem because at that point I had all these, massive amounts of people following me. And I suppose I could have stayed in the marriage just to save face, but it's not my way. And I don't, I try and not let anything own my soul too much. So I have to live, we all have to live an authentic life. So I just trusted life, and I thought maybe my public career as a teacher might be over. And
Wow.
but I was willing to do the right thing by myself and by Mark, and we did get divorced. We did so, fortunately, quite beautifully. We did so very differently than both our parents had done it, mostly because we had a daughter, and I had had parental alienation when I was 10. I never saw my father again until I was an adult. And he lost connection with his mother when his parents divorced when he was just a baby. So we decided that we were going to do this really well, and that our daughter was going to have a really happy childhood where she was very connected to both of us. And so we kind of navigated our way one step at a time through that thorny terrain of parting ways in a way that was pretty elegant and kind and generous and as fair as we could be. And then I ended up creating a course for people that was kind of like a little side thing, because I was teaching online, a lot of live courses. I mean, I still am. And this was back in 2011 or 2010 when I created it and first launched that course. And then eventually Gwyneth got hold of it and she popped it right into the lexicon just as I was writing a book about it. And so that's how it ended up,
So she just happened to find it.
No, she found it through her naturopath, her doctor, who was one of my followers and
Oh,
fans.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So he's the one who ended up writing the article on her website. And but it made, obviously quite a stir. And I was actually when she popped it into the lexicon, I was down in Costa Rica working on the book. And so I was at a yoga retreat center. I just kind of, threw some sweats, pants and stuff into the suitcase. And I got called from the Today Show and the New York Times when she did it. So I was on my way to New York with like my flip-flops, right? So I had people there waiting for me with actual clothes to wear and a
Oh
Coke.
my God.
It's really funny.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, in my opinion, you talked about wondering what that breakup would do to your professional career. I mean, for me, from my perspective, I think it gives credibility to you. We're being able to work through something like that and commentate on it and talk about it in such a beautiful, meaningful way. I think people need that. We can learn so much more.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you. That's really kind of you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm curious though, when you decided to move through this in a very conscious way, I mean, there must have been some kind of anger or some kind of charged feelings on one or both of your sides.
I think there was. And look, it's very normal in a break. Our biology is not set up for coming apart. So, in conscious uncoupling, I really unpack what's happening in the brain and in the body when we have a breakup. And it's quite severe. I think, nature has really hardwired us to stay together. And I think it's a relic of like 1,000 years ago. If you wandered away from your tribe, you would die. You would have died. So we still feel like we're going to die. And we feel under profound levels of threat when a primary attachment figure leaves. And our brains are kind of hardwired to keep us together. So an example of that is that the brain, when somebody is leaving us, the brain, instead of doing the logical thing like lessening our investment in that person, what it does is instead it secretes the same hormones that we had when we were first falling in love. Now, why would that happen? Because the brain wants you to run after that person and get them to change their mind, right? So we're actually really hardwired to stay together. And I think, that's why I have a tendency to create a negative bond where we'll stay, in angry, or we'll be ruminating about that person, not just for weeks or months, sometimes for years. We're driving down the freeway suddenly and a song comes on and we're telling that person off in our head. We haven't seen them in 6 years. It doesn't matter. We still feel right there. It's intimate. So the bond is right there. So what conscious uncoupling does, when Gwyneth and Chris modeled it, they did it like a kind of, elevated, superior form of amicable divorce that they modeled, right? But what I wrote it as or created it as is, what do you do with yourself? How do you deal with your anger? How do you deal with the desire that you have to hurt the person who's hurting you when you're a spiritual person or you're a conscious person and you still want to, you want revenge, you want to badmouth that person, you want to hurt their reputation. Or what do you do when you keep ruminating about them, or where you're kind of collapsed into that story? No one will ever love me. So I wrote it as a 5-step process, and the first 3 steps are all just about you and what you're doing inside yourself. So whatever Gwyneth and Chris were doing, and I don't have a relationship with them, so I don't actually know. And even if I did, I wouldn't say it anyhow. But
Sure.
but I don't know what was going on for them internally that they were able to do that so elegantly publicly. But there's a lot to clean up inside of ourselves to reconcile and resolve. And I found, and first of all, I wrote Conscious Uncoupling because I'd had so many bad breakups that I knew the toll that bad breakups take on us. I know that you can lose months and even years of your life. I know that, from my own personal family, my mother was married 4 times. So she went through 3 divorces, and then she was widowed. But her third husband, who raised me, he was basically my stepfather, and she divorced after 15 years. And 35 years after they were divorced, he was still taking her to court, suing her because she owed him money. So I know firsthand, he's gone now, and I pray for his soul. I think he's in a better place right now. But I think, I know firsthand that time doesn't really heal all wounds. We actually have to do that work. When you were really bonded with someone and you really loved someone and you've been devastated by the loss of that relationship. There's a difference between people who are leaving and people who are left. And the people who are left tend to be the most traumatized because they have not been necessarily creating a whole identity and universe outside the relationship. So it's very devastating. Or potentially, obviously, we all have different levels of resources inside of ourselves that we can rely upon. But if you're left, you're likely quite traumatized by the experience. If you're leaving, you might feel, relief, but you also probably feel guilty, and you probably do still feel confusingly lost because, anyway, feelings are obviously not so linear and neat.
If I may, it's interesting as you just described those 2 stances in a sense. What came to my mind is that the person leaving is future focused, right? The person who's being left is like present, if not in the past focused.
Look at that. That's a great distinction. I never put it together. Thank you.
And
You're absolutely right. Yeah. In a way, the person who's being left, their future just got stolen from them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you wrote the book, what was your hope for the book? What was your
Conscious Uncoupling?
Yeah.
That was a wild ride because, as I said, Gwyneth popped it before I had finished the book. So I ended up on, going to New York, and it was just a wild ride because my book company is Random House. I'm with Harmony Books, and I hadn't even given them a proposal for the book yet. So I go from the Today Show and to the offices of Random House, and there's a board meeting with a ton, like 7, 8 people around, and I just spoke the book.
Oh my gosh.
And we'd made a deal that day, and we went and did it. But several months in, I got breast cancer. So then the book was delayed because I was in breast cancer treatment, and thank God I caught it early enough.
Oh wow!
So, but the whole launch thing was a wild ride because I think books hold, and those are listeners who are authors or writing might understand this. Books hold the frequency or the energy of whatever it is you're dealing with. So most authors know that when you're writing a book, you're kind of in the center of whatever it is you're writing about, and you're struggling with it. So when the book came out, I had a teaching partnership that I'd had for a decade break up. I had an attorney who was trying to get the trademark commit. What do they call it when attorneys mess up? Anyway, they I don't remember the word in this moment, but he misfiled something and the trademark was lost because it went somewhere else. Then I had to hire another attorney. Like all these breakdowns were going on. And I thought, wow, this is what it is sometimes to get a divorce. It's messy, it's confusing, everybody's grasping, things blow up. So the book kind of went out like a big firecracker went out. And but that said, I will tell you that one of the best moments of my whole life was when at the day after Gwyneth announced it on her website that she was getting a conscious uncoupling. I Googled conscious uncoupling, and it was in the dictionary online as redefining divorce in the 21st century.
That's amazing.
And that was one of the proudest moments of my life, given like how tumultuous my childhood was from these multiple divorces.
Wow.
It was beautiful.
Oh my gosh.
So I feel super grateful. And since then, there's been a real, a whole up leveling of how we're doing this differently, not just through my book, but from the book of many people who, it was just one of those things, an idea whose time has come. But I'm very grateful for the very specific ways that conscious uncoupling does really go into the center of someone and mirrors what's going on for them and kind of takes them by the hand, just one step at a time, about how they can actually bring heart repair, healing, and get to a place of freedom and true peace on the other side of it, and up leveling. I mean, one of the things I saw about my husband, Mark, my beautiful husband, Mark, and I just had a birthday. So I have Mark's birthday card here, Mark,
birthday.
that means the world to me. I just adore him. But one of the wonderful things that I was able to see about myself as the source of the breakdown in our relationship is that I really had a lot of missing development around how to create union. And I kind of went into the marriage thinking that somehow the marriage was just a thing. And I didn't realize how much you have to nurture togetherness and stay on the inside with each other and build that kind of connection day in, day out. And I will tell you, one of the promises of conscious uncoupling is if you do this well, you will have happier, healthier love on the other side of this, because whatever you can learn about yourself and how you need to grow, you then take into your next relationship. And that is indeed the story I'm living now, because I did call in my new partner about 5 years ago, and we just have the most delicious love fest like every day. I call it a generative love. It just keeps renewing and expanding and growing and deepening, and we laugh, and there's no like negative residue we're stuck with. And it's pretty amazing. So
Wow.
that's what I want for all of us.
Wow. Is there another book there?
Well, I am working on another book, but it's more about what you were asking about the differences in how we're working on ourselves. Because we're all pretty savvy now about how to work in the past, or we're learning, we're really invested, you have to go Gabor Mate and Basil van der Kolk and, everybody who's really informing people about trauma. And I'm now feeling very called, and I imagine others are too. I don't want to be so, self-important about it, but I'm feeling very called to really bring forth this, more future-focused perspective. Because one of the key things in a future-focused perspective is not just growth, but it's also personal responsibility and how I am the source of my past patterns. So it gets us out of the victimized perspective of some vague imprinting in my unconscious from my past wounds, and it helps me to see how I, as an adult, am making choices that are perpetuating that story and keeping it alive in my present, and who I would need to be, where I need to be centered, and how I need to be showing up differently to be able to evolve beyond it.
Wow. Katherine, you are amazing and you're a delight. I'd love to have you back. I don't care what we talk about, but I just love talking to you. I mean, obviously there's so much to talk about. How do people get in contact with you?
KatherineWoodwardThomas.com. I try and do a free call for the community at least once a month where we're all growing together. So, if you just sign up for my email list, you will be informed of those calls, and I'd love to have you.
Okay, we'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the Books Read Thrive podcast.com. Well, thank you so much. And like I said, love to have you back at a later time. It was an honor meeting you. You're amazing.
Thank you
so much. All right.
Lots of love. Bye-bye.